chains were heavy on his wrists, but heavier still was the silence of the alien throne room. The man known only as Kale, a soldier pulled from the ruins of a forgotten battlefield, knelt before a queen whose eyes glowed like burning stars. Her skin shimmered like crystal under the golden light, and the crown on her head looked grown from living bone. Around him, tall guards stood motionless, their armor reflecting the fires of the hall. He felt their gaze cut into him like blades. Though none moved an inch, the queen herself leaned forward from her throne, her long finger pointing at him. She spoke in a voice that carried through the air like thunder rolling across the earth. Her words were strange, but the translator collar on Kale's neck turned them into harsh but clear sound. She told him he had been spared for one reason. The humans had resisted her armies longer than she expected, and among those who stood last, he was chosen to prove if humanity was worth even a fragment of her mercy. Kale kept his jaw tight and said nothing, though his mind raced. Mercy from this queen did not feel like kindness. It felt like a knife held close to his throat. The queen explained the trial. He would spend a single night in the darkened temple with her daughter. None had survived this test before. Her daughter was beautiful, yes, but she was also cursed, a creature of strange hunger and restless fury. To endure her presence was to walk into the mouth of death itself. Kyle's heart thudded, but he kept his face still. He could see in the queen's glowing eyes that she enjoyed watching fear spread, that she fed on despair the way wolves fed on blood. The hall was silent until Kale finally spoke. His voice was rough from thirst, but steady. He asked what would happen if he survived. The queen's lips curved into a cold smile. If he survived, not only would he be free, but his people would be spared the flames of her army. The promise was carved into the very air by her tone. He would live or die, not for himself, but for humanity's last hope. The weight pressed on his shoulders heavier than the chains. The guards pulled him up and dragged him down the shining corridors, past statues carved of alien heroes and beasts he could not name. His mind fought to keep calm. He had been through battles where the ground shook under tanks and the skies burned with fire. But this was different. This was not war. This was survival against something he did not understand. Each step echoed against the walls until they reached a door far taller than any fortress gate he had ever seen. It was carved with symbols that twisted when he stared at them too long, as if alive. The guards shoved him forward. The door opened with a deep sound, like the roar of mountains breaking apart. Inside, the light dimmed to a dark glow of blue fire. Kyle's eyes adjusted and he saw a figure waiting within. She was sitting in the center of the chamber, her skin glowing faintly like polished stone, her eyes bright with a strange fire. She looked young, almost fragile, but there was something in the air around her that made his chest tighten. The air itself seemed to bend toward her, drawn by her presence. Her gaze lifted to him, calm and sharp at once. A small smile touched her lips, not cruel like her mother's, but unreadable, dangerous in a different way. Kyle stood there, chains heavy on his arms, heart beating fast. He remembered the queen's words. To survive this night was to win mercy. To fail was to bring death not only to himself but to his people. He inhaled deeply, ready to face the storm he could not yet see. The chamber door closed behind him with a sound that echoed like thunder. Kyle stood alone, though he could feel the guard still watching from the other side. The air was heavy, filled with the strange scent of burning metal and flowers he did not recognize. The young alien woman who sat in the center lifted her head, slightly, her glowing eyes fixed on him. For a long moment neither spoke. She rose with fluid grace, her movements slow yet powerful, as though the room itself bent to her will. Her skin shimmered blue like polished stone under the faint firelight, and her hair seemed alive, strands moving like waves of liquid silver. She was striking in her beauty, but Kale remembered the queen's warning. This was no ordinary daughter. This was the trial, and her beauty was the mask of something far more dangerous. Kale's chains clinked as he shifted. His voice was low, but steady. He asked if she was the one he must survive. Her lips curved into a small smile, one that neither comforted nor frightened but unsettled. She said her name was Solara. She did not answer his question directly. Instead, she asked why a human like him thought he deserved mercy at all. The question struck him harder than he expected. He had no answer. Did he deserve it? His people had fought fiercely, yes, but they were beaten. They were prisoners, scattered, hunted. Mercy was not something he expected from conquerors. He told her he did not deserve mercy more than anyone else, but if he had to carry the burden of survival for his people, then he would. His words were simple, but he forced them out with a weight that came from his soul. Solara tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly as though she were studying him like a puzzle. She stepped closer. Kale could hear the faint hum in the air, like the sound of hidden machines or power coursing through the walls. Each step she took made his instincts scream to move back, yet he stood firm. She circled him slowly, her gaze moving over the chains, the torn fabric of his clothes, the scars on his arms. Finally, she stopped in front of him. She reached out with one hand, long fingers brushing against his jaw. Her touch was cool, almost chilling. He did not flinch. Her smile widened slightly, though it carried no warmth. She said many had entered this chamber before him. None had lasted the night. Some had begged, some had fought, some had tried to charm her. All had failed. She asked what made him think he would be different. Kale's heart pounded in his chest. He thought of the Queen's words, of the promise hanging over him like a blade. He thought of his people, broken but not yet gone. He met Solara's glowing eyes and said simply that he would not give her the satisfaction of fear. He had faced death before. If this was the end, he would not crawl before it. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes, something he could not name. It was not anger nor pity. It was closer to curiosity. She stepped back, her smile fading into a calm, unreadable mask. She said the night was long, and survival was not only about courage. It was about endurance, patience, and a strength that went beyond the body. Kyle remained still as she turned and walked back to the center of the chamber. She sat again, her hands resting on her knees, her gaze never leaving him. The silence returned, but now it was heavier, filled with unspoken challenge. Kale lowered himself slowly to the floor, chains clinking, his back against the cold wall. He had no weapon, no plan. All he had was the will to face whatever trial came. The blue fire in the chamber burned low, shadows stretching across the walls. Hours stretched ahead of him like an endless road. Solara's glowing eyes stayed fixed on him, and Kale felt as if the true test had only just begun. The hours crept forward, each one slower than the last. The chamber remained quiet except for the faint hum that pulsed through the walls like a heartbeat. Kyle sat with his back against the stone, his eyes never leaving the alien girl who watched him without blinking. Solara had not moved for what felt like an eternity. She sat in stillness, glowing faintly in the firelight, her presence both beautiful and unsettling. Kale tried to calm his mind, but the silence pressed against him like a weight. He thought of his fellow soldiers, of the long nights they had survived together in trenches filled with mud and fear. Compared to those nights, this should have felt simple, but it did not. The Queen's words echoed in his mind. None had survived this night. None. What awaited him here was worse than bullets or fire. It was something he could not yet see. At last, Solara spoke. Her voice was soft, almost musical, but it carried an edge that made the hair on his arms rise. She asked him why humans fought so hard for survival, when the galaxy already saw them as weak and broken. Her words cut, and Kale felt a spark of anger stir inside him. He answered that humanity had always been called weak, always been underestimated, but they endured. They survived storms, plagues, wars, and even worlds that tried to kill them. Weakness was what others saw. Endurance was what kept them alive. Her glowing eyes narrowed, and she tilted her head as if weighing his words. Then, without warning, she rose to her feet. The blue fire in the chamber flared brighter, casting long shadows. Kyle tensed, chains rattling as he prepared himself. Solara stepped toward him, slow and deliberate, until she stood so close he could feel the cold air radiating from her skin. She leaned down, her face inches from his, her eyes burning with strange light. She told him that his endurance would be tested not by blades or chains, but by what lived inside the night itself. Kale did not understand until he heard it, the faint scrape of something moving in the dark beyond the blue fire. His breath caught as the shadows seemed to shift, shapes crawling along the walls. He realized they were not alone. Solara stepped back, her gaze never leaving him. She said this was the first trial. If he could not stand against fear, he would not live to see the dawn. The shadows thickened, forming into creatures that slithered and clawed their way from the darkness. Their bodies were twisted with limbs too long and faces hidden beneath jagged bone. Their eyes glowed faintly, the same eerie blue as Solara's, but filled with hunger. Kyle's instincts screamed at him to fight, but he had no weapon, no freedom from his chains. His fists tightened. If this was the test, he would not go down on his knees. The first creature lunged at him with a shriek that cut the air. Kyle rolled to the side, the chain pulling hard against his wrist, but giving him just enough room to move. The creature slammed into the wall, stone cracking beneath its weight. Kale scrambled back to his feet, heart pounding. Another shadow leapt, claws flashing, and he swung the heavy chain into its face. The strike sent it crashing to the ground in a spray of blue sparks. Solara's smile widened faintly as she watched him fight. She made no move to help, no move to stop the shadows. She was the judge, and the trial was his alone. Kyle struck again, and again, using the chain as his only weapon. His arms ached, his breath burned, but he forced himself to keep moving. The creatures came from every corner, their screeches filling the chamber. He felt one claw rake across his shoulder, burning cold as it cut through his flesh. Pain shot through him, but he roared and slammed his chain down until the creature fell still. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, but finally, the shadows began to fade, their twisted forms dissolving into smoke. Kyle stood trembling, his body covered in sweat and blood, the chain heavy in his grip. The chamber was quiet again. Only Solara's glowing eyes remained on him. She stepped closer, her voice soft but clear. She told him he had passed the first trial, but the night was not yet over. The real test still waited in the hours to come. Kale leaned against the wall, his breath ragged, sweat mixing with blood on his skin. The chain felt like iron fire in his hands, every muscle screaming from the fight. His heart still pounded, with the memory of those shadow creatures, their twisted limbs and bone faces tearing through the silence. He had survived, but only just. Solara stood in the center of the chamber, her glowing eyes fixed on him. She did not look impressed or disappointed. Her face was calm, unreadable, like a storm waiting to break. At last she spoke, her voice as soft as before, but now it carried something sharper. She told him that survival was not only about striking enemies down. Survival meant carrying the weight of what followed. She asked if he was ready for the next part of the night. Kyle wiped blood from his mouth and forced himself upright. His arms shook, but he stood tall. He told her that whatever trial came, he would face it. His voice was not loud, but it was steady. He had nothing else left but resolve. Solara's lips curved into the faintest smile, and with a wave of her hand, the fire dimmed lower. The chamber changed. The walls rippled like water, and the ground seemed to breathe beneath him. Kyle's vision blurred, and suddenly he was no longer standing in the stone hall. He was in a place he knew well. Mud, rain, the sharp smell of smoke. He was back on Earth, back on the battlefield where his unit had fallen. The sky burned red, shells exploding overhead, screams of soldiers filling the air. He staggered forward, chains still on his wrists, but everything felt too real. His heart froze when he saw familiar faces, his brothers in arms, men who had fought beside him. They lay broken in the mud, staring at him with empty eyes. Kale shouted their names, but no answer came. The rain poured harder, soaking him to the bone. Then one of them moved. His closest friend, Joran, rose slowly from the ground, his body twisted and pale, his eyes glowing the same blue as Solara's. Joran's voice came in a broken whisper, asking why Kale had survived when the rest had not, why he had left them to die. The words cut deeper than any blade. Kale's chest tightened, his breath catching. He tried to speak, to explain, but his throat closed around the words. He had carried the guilt of that day for so long, buried it under anger and survival. Now it stood before him, alive and cruel. Solara's voice echoed around him, though she did not appear in this vision. She told him the second trial was not about strength but about truth. Could he face his own guilt without breaking? Could he carry it without letting it destroy him? Joran's figure staggered closer, his twisted body reaching out with shaking hands. Kale's mind screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. His chains rattled as he dropped to his knees in the mud. He shouted that he had not wanted to live while they died. He had not chosen survival over them. It was fate, chaos, war, and yet he carried their memory every day, every step. He told the figure he would never forget, never abandon their sacrifice. For a moment, silence filled the vision. Then the twisted soldier stopped. His glowing eyes dimmed, his form fading into mist. One by one, the other bodies vanished too, leaving only Kale on the field. The rain slowed and the burning sky began to fade. When Kale blinked, he was back in the chamber. His body shook, though no wound had touched him this time. Solara still watched, her expression unreadable. She said quietly that he had faced his ghosts, but the night still held more shadows. Kale lowered himself back against the wall, exhausted. He had survived 2 trials, but the weight of the Queen's promise pressed heavier with every moment. If this was only the beginning, he wondered how long a man's resolve could truly last. Kale's body trembled, though he tried to hide it. The first trial had left his flesh bleeding, and the second had torn open wounds no blade could reach. He had faced monsters and his own guilt, but he knew the night was far from over. Solara remained seated in the center of the chamber, her glowing eyes fixed on him. She had not moved much, yet Kale could feel her presence filling the room, as if she was the one who held the night itself in her hands. She asked him a question that made his chest tighten. If he survived until dawn, what would he do with Mercy? Would he lead his people to rebuild, or would he seek revenge against her mother's empire? Her voice was calm, but Kale could sense the trap hidden inside. Mercy was dangerous. If he answered wrong, perhaps this trial would end before it began. Kale's jaw tightened. He thought of the burning cities, the cries of his people, the endless war that had brought him to this place. Revenge burned in him, yes, but he also thought of what survival meant. He told her that mercy meant a chance for his people to live, again not to spend their last strength chasing blood. His voice shook, not because of doubt, but because the truth was raw inside him. Solara tilted her head, studying him. She seemed almost disappointed, almost curious, as though she wanted him to choose hatred. Her lips parted and she whispered that peace was not always what it seemed. Sometimes peace was just another chain. Then she rose, her silver hair flowing like water as she stretched out her arms. The chamber darkened once more. The blue fire faded until there was only shadow. Kyle tensed, his chain ready in his hands, but this time no creatures came. Instead, the walls around him dissolved, and he found himself in a strange place unlike any battlefield he had known. It was a forest, but not of earth. Towering trees glowed faintly, their branches stretching like arms into the endless dark sky. The air shimmered with floating motes of light, and the ground beneath his boots was soft as ash. Solara's voice came from somewhere unseen, telling him this was the third trial. Here, he would not fight monsters or ghosts. Here, he would face temptation. Kale's eyes darted across the glowing forest, heart beating faster. From the shadows, figures began to emerge. At first, he thought they were more of the twisted creatures, but when he looked closer, his breath caught. They were humans, families, children. Their faces were whole, alive, unscarred by war. They smiled at him, calling his name softly. Voices filled with warmth. He saw his mother, long dead, reaching out with open arms. He saw children running, laughing, their voices echoing like music. Kyle's knees weakened. His body screamed to run to them, to embrace the life he had lost. The forest seemed to glow brighter as they beckoned him. He could smell the food, hear the laughter, feel the pull of home. For a moment he forgot the chains, the queen, the trial. He almost forgot the promise. But then he looked closer. The smiles were too perfect, the voices too sweet. His mother's eyes glowed faintly, just like Solara's. His stomach turned cold. This was not real, this was a lie. A cage built of dreams. Kale clenched his fists, forcing his body back from the vision. He shouted that his people did not need illusions. They needed freedom. They needed truth, no matter how painful. His voice cracked, but it cut through the false forest like a blade. The figures dissolved into smoke, the laughter turning into a hollow echo. The glowing trees dimmed until the chamber returned, stone and fire once more. Kyle fell to his knees, gasping for breath, his body shaking with exhaustion. Solara stood before him again, her eyes unreadable. She said softly that many had failed this trial. Many had chosen the lie because it was easier than pain. He had resisted, but the night was still young. The true test, she whispered, had not even begun. Kyle looked up at her, sweat stinging his eyes, his chest rising and falling, with heavy breaths. The promise of mercy felt further away than ever. Kale's body was near breaking. His wounds throbbed, his mind felt torn, and yet he forced himself to stand. He had faced monsters, ghosts, and lies. Each trial had stripped a piece of him away, but still he remained. The weight of the Queen's promise hung over him, heavier than the chains that bound his wrists. Solara circled him slowly now, her glowing eyes sharp, her expression unreadable. She said the night was far from done. To survive meant more than strength, more than endurance. It meant proving what he truly was when everything else was taken. Kale asked her what that meant, but she did not answer. Instead, she touched the stone floor with her bare hand, and once again the chamber shifted around them. The firelight vanished, and Kale found himself standing on the edge of a great chasm. A narrow bridge of broken stone stretched across the endless void. Wind howled, carrying voices like whispers that clawed at his ears. Solara stood at the far side of the bridge, her silver hair flowing like a banner, her eyes fixed on him. She told him this was the next trial. To reach her, he must cross alone. Kyle's throat tightened. The bridge was narrow, no wider than his boots, and the drop below had no bottom. The chains on his wrists dragged heavy, pulling at his balance. The whispers in the wind grew louder, calling him by name, reminding him of every failure. He set one foot on the stone, and it groaned beneath his weight. He moved slowly, step by step, the void pulling at him like a hungry mouth. The voices grew harsher. They told him he would fall. They told him he was weak, unworthy, broken. His stomach twisted as the bridge shook beneath him. He tightened his grip on the chain, using it as counterweight, his eyes locked on Solara at the far side. Halfway across, the stone cracked under his boot. Kyle froze, his heart pounding, arms stretched wide to balance. The voices screamed louder, now filling his head until it felt like it would split. He gritted his teeth, shouting into the wind that he would not fall. He would not give in. His voice was swallowed by the storm, but his will did not break. Step by step, he forced himself forward. His muscles shook, his body swayed, but his focus never left Solara's glowing figure. At last, he stumbled onto solid ground, collapsing to his knees. His lungs burned, his legs quivered, but he had crossed. Solara looked down at him with something new in her eyes. It was not cruelty, not pity, but something closer to respect. She asked why he had not turned back, why he had not let the voices push him into the void. Kyle lifted his head, sweat dripping down his face. He told her that fear would not be the end of him. His people had no one else left. If he fell, they fell too. That was reason enough to keep moving. Her expression softened for just a moment before the calm mask returned. She stepped closer, kneeling so her face was level with his. Her voice lowered, carrying a tone that almost felt human. She said that trials were not only her mother's command, they were her own. She was not simply watching him. She was measuring him. Kyle's chest tightened. He asked her what she truly wanted from him. For the first time, her eyes shifted away, as though the answer was one she could not yet give. She rose to her feet, telling him the night was not over. The final hours would reveal the truth. The chamber returned, the chasm vanishing, the firelight flickering once more. Kale lay on the cold stone, his body trembling, his mind heavy with questions. He had survived again, but each step deeper into the night brought him closer to something he did not yet understand. Solara stood silent, her gaze distant as though she too wrestled with something unseen. The fire burned low, shadows stretching long across the chamber walls. Kyle lay on the stone floor, chest rising and falling with slow, heavy breaths. His body begged for rest, but rest would not come. Every trial had drained him, carved at his spirit, but still the night pressed on. Solara stood watching him, her glowing eyes unreadable. For a long time she said nothing. Then she spoke, her voice quiet, almost thoughtful. She told him that his strength had surprised her. Most who entered this chamber fell quickly, some by fear, some by temptation, some by despair. Yet he remained, though he had nothing left but chains and resolve. She asked him how he could keep standing when everything around him was meant to break him. Kale forced himself to sit upright, though his muscles ached with every movement. He met her gaze and told her the truth. He did not fight for himself. He fought because someone had to bear the weight of survival. If his body failed, his people's hope failed with him. He carried them, even here in the dark, for the first time. Solara's expression shifted. The calm mask cracked just enough for Kale to see a flicker of something deep inside. It looked like sorrow. She stepped closer, kneeling in front of him. Her voice softened. She said she had been called a curse since birth. The night he endured was the night she lived every day. Those who came near her never survived, not because she struck them down, but because something within her devoured them. Kale's breath caught. He looked into her glowing eyes and realized the truth. The trials were not only to test him, they were also her prison. The creatures, the illusions, the whispers, they came from her. She was the trial. Solara lowered her gaze, her silver hair falling across her face. She told him she had never wished for this fate, but her mother had turned it into a weapon. Suitors, warriors, enemies, all were thrown into her chamber. None had survived, and each failure had only proved the queen's power. Her voice trembled, as she admitted she had stopped hoping long ago. Kyle sat in silence, his mind racing. For the first time since the night began, he felt something shift inside him. Solara was not only his trial. She was a prisoner, just like him. He whispered that perhaps survival did not mean standing against her, but standing with her. Her eyes snapped back to him, wide with shock. For a heartbeat, the air in the chamber stilled. She searched his face as if trying to see if his words were true. Then she shook her head, stepping back quickly, her mask returning. She told him to rest while he could. The final trials would come with the darkest hours before dawn. But Kale could not rest. His thoughts would not let him. He had seen her sorrow, and it clung to him like a shadow. He remembered the queen's promise, the cold cruelty in her voice. If this night was her game, then Solara had been its pawn all along. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. It was impossible to tell in the endless chamber. Kyle's body swayed with exhaustion, but he did not close his eyes. He kept them fixed on Solara, who now sat once more in the center, silent and still. The firelight flickered across her skin, making her seem both fragile and dangerous, victim and captor. When she finally rose again, the flames flared high. She said the time had come for the fourth trial, and this one would decide if he truly deserved mercy. Her voice was steady, but Kyle could hear a trace of something beneath it. Fear, or perhaps hope. Kyle pushed himself to his feet, chain in hand, his body ready though his strength was almost gone. He looked at her and nodded. Whatever waited, he would face it. Not only for his people now, but perhaps for her as well. The chamber darkened once more as Solara lifted her hand. The fire shrank to small flickers, leaving the room washed in shadows. Kyle steadied himself, muscles trembling, chains heavy at his side. He felt the air grow colder, heavy like a storm about to break. Solara's voice carried across the silence. She said the next trial was not one he could strike with chains or deny with words. This trial was the heart. It would strip away every shield until nothing remained but truth. Kale's stomach tightened. He had faced monsters and illusions, but the weight in her tone told him this would be worse. The stone floor beneath his feet dissolved, and once again the world shifted. Kale found himself standing in a wide field under a dark sky. The ground was cracked and dry, the air heavy with the scent of ash. In the distance, he saw a figure walking toward him. As it drew closer, his chest tightened with recognition. It was his father. Not as Kale remembered him, but as he had looked on the day he died. His clothes were torn, his face pale, his voice broken with disappointment. The vision spoke, asking why Kale had failed, why he had let their world burn, why he carried chains instead of victories. Each word struck like a hammer against his chest. Kale staggered back, heart pounding. He shouted that he had fought, that he had bled, that he had not chosen this. But the figure only came closer, accusing him again and again. The voices from the void returned, whispering failure, whispering weakness. Kale's knees buckled. He felt the weight of every life lost pressing down on him. For a moment he almost believed the words, almost believed he had no right to carry hope. Then through the storm of voices he heard something else. Solara's voice, soft but steady. She told him not to run from the truth, to face it, to carry it. Her words cut through the noise. Kale forced himself to stand, his chains rattling as he lifted his head. He looked at the vision of his father and spoke with a voice rough but unshaken. He admitted he had failed. He admitted he could not save everyone. But he would not let guilt turn him into nothing. He lived, and as long as he lived, he would fight for those who still breathed. That was all he could give, and it was enough. The vision froze. The figure's eyes dimmed, the cracked ground trembling. Then, like smoke, it vanished into the night sky. The field dissolved, and Kyle fell, back into the chamber, chest heaving, body trembling. Solara stood close now, her glowing eyes on him. Her face was unreadable, but her voice carried something it had not before, respect. She said he had faced the truth of his weakness and still chosen to carry it. Few could do that. Kale met her gaze, sweat dripping down his face. He asked her why she cared. Was she not only his trial? Was she not meant to watch him break? Her lips parted, but for a moment no sound came. Then she whispered that perhaps she was tired of watching men die in her presence. Perhaps she wanted just once to see someone survive. Her voice trembled, and Kyle felt the weight of her sorrow again, heavier than any illusion. Before he could answer, the fire flared suddenly bright. The walls shook, the chamber trembling as if the palace itself was alive. Solara's eyes widened, and she stepped back quickly. She told him the night was reaching its final hour. The queen herself was watching more closely now. Kale pushed himself upright, every bone aching but his spirit unbroken. He had survived again, but the hardest part still waited. He could feel it in the air, thick with danger. Solara stood silent, but he thought he saw fear flicker in her glowing eyes. The chamber shook with a low rumble, dust falling from the ceiling. Kyle braced himself, the chain tight in his hands, eyes fixed on Solara. Her calm mask had finally broken. For the first time since the night began, he saw true fear on her face. She whispered that her mother was watching now. The queen had grown impatient. If Kale survived too much, it would not prove weakness. It would prove strength. And strength was dangerous. Solara turned her face away, silver hair falling across her shoulders. She said the next trial might not test him. It might destroy him. Kale clenched his fists, lifting his chin. He told her he had come this far, if. The queen thought fear would make him fall. She was wrong. Solara's eyes softened, though her voice stayed low. She told him she hoped his words were true. Then the flames in the chamber burst high, and the air split with a roar. From the fire came a creature unlike any Kale had seen before, larger than the shadows, stronger than the illusions. It filled the chamber with its presence. Its body was shaped like a beast of stone and metal, claws glowing hot, its mouth wide with teeth that shimmered like blades. The ground shook with each step it took. Kyle's breath caught. His body was broken, his wounds deep, but he forced his legs to stand. The chain felt light in his grip compared to the weight of what stood before him. Solara whispered that this was the last beast. It had slain every warrior who had entered before him. If he fell, there would be no dawn for him, or for his people. The beast lunged, claws slamming into the stone where Kale had stood a heartbeat earlier. He rolled aside, chains rattling, pain burning through his ribs. The chamber filled with dust and fire as the beast roared again. Kyle swung the chain hard, the iron striking across its glowing hide. Sparks flew, but the beast did not slow. Again and again he struck, each blow echoing through the chamber. The beast's claws caught his shoulder, dragging deep lines of fire across his flesh. He cried out but did not fall. He forced himself forward, wrapping the chain around its leg, pulling with all his strength. The beast stumbled for an instant, roaring louder, and Kyle drove his fist into its head with everything he had left. The chamber shook with the impact. The beast staggered, but it did not fall. Kyle's breath came in ragged gasps. His body felt like it was breaking apart. Still, he refused to kneel. He tightened the chain again, eyes burning with fury. Solara stood watching, her hands clenched at her sides. Her voice rose above the roar, urging him not to stop. For the first time, her words were not a test, they were a plea. She wanted him to win. Kyle roared back at the beast, his voice filled with everything he carried. The anger, the pain, the hope of his people. With one last surge, he pulled the chain tight around its throat, leaping onto its back. The beast thrashed, claws tearing into the stone. But Kale held on. He pulled until his muscles tore, until his vision blurred, until the beast finally collapsed. The chamber fell silent. The fire dimmed, the ground stilled. Kale lay on the floor, chest heaving, the chain slipping from his hands. The beast's body dissolved into smoke, leaving only the scorched stone behind. Solara rushed to him, kneeling at his side. Her glowing eyes shone with something he had not seen before. Fear for him. She whispered that he had done what none before him could. He had survived. The queen would not forgive this. Kale tried to rise, but his body refused. He looked into Solara's eyes and saw the truth she had hidden all night. She did not want him to perish. She wanted him to endure. Perhaps even more than he did. The chamber door rumbled open, golden light flooding in. Solara froze, her body stiffening. The queen had come. The golden light filled the chamber as the great doors opened. The alien queen stepped inside, her crown gleaming like fire, her eyes glowing with cold power. Her presence pressed against Kale's chest like a mountain. Even broken and bleeding, he forced himself to rise, staggering to his feet. Solara stood at his side, her face pale, her glowing eyes fixed on her mother. The queen's voice thundered through the hall. She said the impossible had happened. A human had endured the night beside her daughter. No other warrior, no other champion, had done so. She studied Kale as though he were a puzzle that did not fit her design. Then her gaze shifted to Solara, sharp as a blade. She asked what trick had been played, what weakness had allowed this man to live. Solara did not answer. Her silence was heavy, but her hand moved slightly, as if ready to shield him. The queen's eyes narrowed. She said mercy was promised, but mercy came with chains. If Kale survived, he would serve her empire. Humanity would not be destroyed, but they would bend to her throne. That was the price. Kale's heart pounded. The promise of freedom twisted into slavery. His people would live, but not as themselves. He felt the weight of the queen's command heavier than all the trials he had faced. Then Solara stepped forward. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. She said her mother was wrong. Mercy was not chains. Mercy was choice. Kale had proven himself not because of tricks, but because of will. He had faced monsters, illusions, despair, and still he stood. She turned to Kale, her glowing eyes softening. She said he had endured where others fell because he carried more than himself. He carried his people. The queen's fury crackled through the air. Lightning-like energy sparked from her crown, striking the stone. She commanded Solara to step aside. Solara refused. Her voice broke, but did not falter. She said she would not be her mother's weapon anymore. Kale saw the queen's rage rising, and he stepped forward, his body screaming with pain. His voice was hoarse, but it carried through the chamber. He said his people would not bow. If the queen wanted slaves, she would have to kill him here and now. He had survived the night not to kneel, but to prove that humanity could not be broken. For a long moment, silence filled the hall. The queen's eyes burned, her power rising. But then her gaze flicked to Solara, who stood firm at Kale's side. The queen saw the truth. Her daughter had chosen. This trial, meant to prove humanity weak, had instead planted defiance in her own bloodline. To strike now would risk breaking what she feared most: loyalty from her daughter. The queen's fury turned cold. She declared the trial complete. Humanity would be spared. Kale would live. But her warning was clear. If humanity ever rose against her empire, mercy would not come again. With that, she turned and swept from the hall, her guards following like shadows. When the doors closed, silence fell. Kyle staggered, nearly falling, but Solara caught his arm. For the first time, her smile was warm. She whispered that he had done what no one else could. He had survived the night, and in doing so, he had freed her as well. Kale met her gaze, his chest heavy with exhaustion, but filled with something new: hope. Not only for his people, but for her. Perhaps survival was not just about enduring. Perhaps it was about changing the chains into something stronger than fear. The fire in the chamber dimmed, leaving only the two of them standing together in the quiet. Kyle exhaled slowly, his body broken, but his spirit unbowed. Dawn was near. He had won mercy, not only for humanity but for the daughter of the queen who had once promised his death. And for the first time, he believed mercy could be real.